Welcome, sister. Thank you so much for being here. And I've been really excited for this conversation because abusive relationships and toxic relationships and this whole area is very near to my heart. As many listening know my story, I have some experience in abusive relationships. And when I first read your bio, I actually giggled a little bit because we have a lot of similarities in our story, in our own stories, as I once was engaged to be married and I had a Porsche and
Serious?
Yeah, and a part
I
of
did
my
not know about the
journey.
Porsche factor.
Yeah, it's so funny. And I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari.
I haven't. I'm going to have to add it to my list.
I read it back then and I was very inspired. I'm like, I just want to get rid of everything and move to Thailand. So part of that journey was basically getting as far away from possible as I could from that relationship. So I went on a one-way flight to China. That began my journey. And yeah, I got rid of my car and that was a part of it. So I thought that was interesting. And I saw that you also got rid of your car and then you moved from Florida to Seattle, which is pretty much as far away as you can get in America.
The furthest possible place, staying within the US boundaries, yes. And that
Yeah.
was very intentional. That was not an accident.
Yeah. Wow. So interesting. So I guess to begin, I would love to know a little bit more about your story, how you got to that point, and you were married, I believe, right?
I was, yes. So my life was always very traditional and typical. I was kind of going through the typical milestones, right? Like you graduate high school, you go to college, you get married, you buy a house. I was kind of checking off all the to-do lists of life.
Mhm.
And I took some detours along the way. And in hindsight, I'm so glad I did because those detours led me to where I am today. But I found myself living what I thought was my dream life. I lived in this beautiful house. I drove a Porsche. You know how fun it is driving a Porsche, but I realized all of these external, superficial things don't equal a satisfying and fulfilling life. And I couldn't figure out why I was still very unhappy. And I knew the circumstances of my relationship were toxic. I didn't realize how toxic they were until I actually left. So I was married. I was married for 7.5 years before I made the decision to leave the marriage. And when I made that decision to leave, I didn't realize how abusive the circumstances were. I just knew that I wasn't happy and it wasn't a life that I could keep living. I literally felt like I was drowning every single day of my life. So on December 16th of 2017, I woke up that morning and told my then abusive, now ex-husband, that I wasn't happy and I wanted a divorce. But I did not commit to leaving at that time. And shockingly, things did not get better. Things got way worse until March of 2018 when I just needed to escape. Like I could not stay there any longer. It really was just so incredibly toxic. So I took a trip. I took a 2-week vacation to Washington. And during that time, I committed to the decision I already knew in my heart and soul that I needed to make. And that was I needed to leave my life in Florida. I needed to leave the marriage and I needed to start over. So I was in Washington for what was supposed to be a 2-week vacation. And after that, I flew back to Florida, packed my shit in garbage bags out of my dream house and filed for divorce and realized I went broke overnight because my ex withdrew every single penny we had from our account. So naturally, my next stop was the Porsche dealership because I could no longer afford my car payment. And 2 days later, I was on a flight back to Washington and I was like, all right, I live here now. Let's do this. Let's start over.
Wow. Wow. That's so powerful and good for you for finding really the inner power and the courage to get, to stand up and actually walk away from that. Because coming from my experience, it's really easy to look at a relationship like that from, from the outside and be like, oh, if I was ever in an abusive relationship, or if I was ever treated this way, I would just pack my stuff and leave. I used to say that before I was actually in one, but it becomes like that toxicity becomes almost like an addiction. And when you're caught up
Yes.
in that cycle of abuse, it's not so easy as just like recognizing that it's toxic and walking away. You actually, it takes a lot to actually be able to walk away from that. So,
Yeah, and it's so challenging to walk away because one of the side effects of being in an abusive and toxic relationship is the manipulation and the mind games.
mm-hmm,
So gaslighting, it conditions you to doubt yourself and to really question your own reality. So at the time, I was so confused. I wasn't sure if I was making the best decision of my life by leaving or the worst
mm-hmm,
decision of my life by leaving. But ultimately, it was the fear of regret that led me to take action,
mm-hmm,
because the thought of waking up 5, 10, or 15 years from then and regretting not leaving sooner was not something that I could ever accept. That really overcame
mm-hmm,
all of my other fears of, am I ruining my life, to allow
mm-hmm.
me to take action. And in hindsight, it was absolutely the best decision I could have possibly made.
Wow, I can say the same about my decision too, to take the leap and take the flight. So if anyone's listening and isn't sure, like I do feel that what's waiting for us on the other side of that big leap is, it's usually more in alignment for us than what's behind, but it's scary just to take that leap. So I was curious, did you know anyone in Washington, or did you just go for it? And did you have a support system at the time?
Yeah, so my sister actually lives in Washington, which is really the reason I made the decision to move
Mm-hmm.
there, because I just felt more comfortable moving someplace where I had some support. And I actually ended up living with my sister for a period of time while I was transitioning out here, because I didn't have access to any resources, financially. I was technically homeless because I had no
Mm-hmm.
money whatsoever. I didn't have a car, I didn't have a job. So I kind of crashed my sister's family life. And I am so, so grateful for the support from my family and just the resources they provided me, both, financially and emotionally. And they found a domestic violence support group for me that I
Oh.
agreed to go to. And at the time, I remember the very first session, I'm there and everyone's going around doing their introductions, and I'm listening to these other women share their stories. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't belong here. Most of them
Mm-hmm.
had, experienced physical violence and domestic abuse physically, and I didn't. It was purely emotional. So at the time, I expressed that I truly was, I empathized with their situations, but I'm like, I don't think I belong here. And they were like, nope, you do belong here, because emotional abuse is still considered domestic violence. Just because you don't have, physical wounds, those emotional wounds are sometimes more challenging to heal.
And unfortunately, they become like the norm for us. So we get caught up in that and don't even realize that it is abuse.
Hmm.
So at that time, what do you feel, aside from having your sister and say the support group, what practices or what do you feel really empowered you at that time? For me personally, I feel that yoga was I didn't have a big support system, especially going over to Asia where I knew no one and no one really spoke
Yeah.
English where I was, which was good for me at the time, though I got off social media. I had no contact with my ex and I was just totally immersed in this new world. But yoga definitely helped me to remember my inner strength at the time. So did you have any specific practices that helped you through that transition?
Yes. Yeah, that's such a great question. And, I remember thinking to myself that this is not going to be the worst thing that ever happened to me. I am somehow going to find a way to make this be the best thing that ever happens, because I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm going through all of this suck, I might as well make it worthwhile, make it worth something.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognized that I was the common denominator in my life. And I knew if I kept bringing the same version of myself to new life experiences, then I wasn't really going to see any changes in my life. So I really committed to healing from the trauma of the relationship. And part of that was discovering who I was as a person, because toxic and abusive relationships have this not so awesome side effect of stripping away your identity, because your
Mm-hmm.
entire identity is attached to another being. And when they're
Mm-hmm.
removed from your life, you literally have no idea who you are. So I committed to discovering who I was. And one of the things that I did was I just committed to trying new things, trying all things I haven't done before and always wanted to, but never prioritized because I was never prioritizing myself. Yoga was one of those things. I took my first yoga class and just became obsessed because I've never had an outlet like that where I could truly
Mm-hmm.
just connect to this inner being that I am. And it really helped me recognize that there's this relationship that you have with yourself. And I missed that life memo. I didn't know that you were supposed to have a relationship with yourself. So I never really did. I never really knew myself. So yoga was something that I committed to. Journaling was an amazing resource for me because it helped me process what happened, and it also helped me get clarity for the future that I wanted and what I wanted my life to look like. So, journaling, yoga, just really committing to my spiritual practice with affirmations. And I got into listening to TED Talks and podcasts and really just surrounding myself with the information that I wanted to include in my life.
Wow, it's powerful. Yeah, journaling was a really big part of mine too, and just self-discovery because I did definitely lose my identity a lot and really just becoming this like honestly, I was like a beaten little dog looking back at it. That's how I feel. Like my whole life revolved around kind of taking care of this person and oh, is he going to get upset
Mm-hmm.
again? And it was like my nervous system was in this constant state. So I was so distracted from my true self. And I love that you say, really, it's our perspective that it can be this tragedy that's happened to us, or we can flip it and make it the best thing that's ever happened to us, right? And I think we can
Mm-hmm.
really flip the script like that in really any area of our life or anything, any big changes that we go through.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times we forget that we get to decide the meaning that we give to our life circumstances. And
Mm-hmm.
there's always two ends of the stick. There's always another way to view it. And it's not disregarding what happened by any means, but it's just
Mm-hmm.
choosing to view it in a way that's empowering rather than staying stuck in that victim mindset. Because you could play the victim your entire life, but you're never going to be the main character in your life story if you're playing that
Mm-hmm.
victim role.
In your own journey, when you were married, did it take time to realize that it was abusive through like little things, or were you told from people in your life that it was, or did you kind of figure it out on your own? And I guess I'm asking for those who might be in a relationship and they're not really aware if it's toxic or abusive, and how can you recognize when you're in a toxic relationship?
Yeah, there, looking back, there were all kinds of red flags that I
Mm-hmm.
overlooked and disregarded. And part of the reason I overlooked them is because I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust my own intuition. But there were signs from the very beginning, just little things, right? Like it's always the little things that you make excuses for and you rationalize because you want to be in the relationship. You have this vision of this future and you want the other person to like
Mm-hmm.
you. And, I have a history of, tendencies related to codependency and people pleasing. So all of those variables contributed to me overlooking those signs. But there was always the sensation that I needed to kind of, it's that walking on eggshells feeling where you feel like you need to change who you are, what you're thinking, how you're acting to avoid upsetting or to really, you know, maintain the peace within the relationship. So there were signs throughout that I definitely overlooked and disregarded. I think the biggest red flag is if you're asking yourself if a relationship is toxic, there's a good chance it's toxic, right? And it's really, how do you know it's toxic? It's how it makes you feel. If you feel like you aren't able to show up as who you are in the relationship, if you are, changing or filtering yourself to avoid how the other person's going to react or respond. If you're sharing and being vulnerable with someone and they use those insecurities against you, those are all signs of toxic patterns within the relationship. And really just connecting to yourself and noticing how you feel within the relationship is the biggest sign to tell if it's toxic or not. But then you have to trust yourself, which that was one of the missing components for me, because I knew it didn't feel right, but I didn't trust myself to actually acknowledge my intuition. And nobody really told me how toxic it was. And a lot of times people don't know. It's not super obvious from the outside. It might appear that you're in this ideal relationship because a lot of times that's the presentation that the other person, that the partner wants to portray as well. So it's not always obvious from the outside.
Mhm. Yeah, and it seems like such a simple concept to just follow how you feel, but we're so good at convincing ourselves that things are better than they are. Because when I started learning about using your feelings as guides, it's such a simple concept, like, oh, I'm feeling bad and stressed and scared or whatever it is, like my nervous system is, a little bit out of place. And we can just convince ourselves still that things are good, and that it's like, it seems very simple, but if you're feeling shitty all the time and you're feeling nervous
Yeah.
to be yourself and you're having these feelings come up, then you should know that it's kind of toxic. But I think we can also convince ourselves otherwise.
And it's not really funny, but it's kind of funny because throughout my healing journey and navigating the aftermath of the abusive marriage, I realized that I kind of always avoided feeling feelings. I thought that those perceived negative feelings were things to be avoided, problems to fix and solve, and not recognizing that no, that's your internal guidance system navigating you
Mm-hmm.
through life. So if you're ignoring and disregarding your feelings, you're essentially telling your intuition to fuck off, which no wonder you're overlooking signs. So those red flags that you see, they're not home decor. They're something to notice and pay attention to, because the signs in the beginning will become billboards in the end. They don't go
Mm.
away.
Wow. Yeah, I like that. They definitely don't go away.
Nope, you can ignore
um,
them all you want.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Cal, you have some interesting and very bold ways of explaining parts of ourselves. Like you have the inner dumb bitch I saw,
Yes, yeah.
and
And
resting bitch face. Yeah.
yes,
Do you want to
my
expand on those terms a little bit?
I would love to, because they coincide perfectly with my personality and my humor, but there's also a lot of underlying symbolism as well.
Mm,
So how I cured my resting bitch face is it's my brand, it's my program, and it was actually inspired by my ex-husband, because he would ask
mhm,
me quite regularly. Like, this would be a typical, I don't know, let's just say a Tuesday morning. He would say, "What's wrong with your face? Why do you look like such a bitch?" And at the
wow.
time, I still thought that it was my fault. I was the problem, right? So my
Mm,
response was always the same. I would always say, "I don't know, sorry, it's just my face. I'll try to change it."
mhm,
And when I left the relationship, I actually created a plan and a program for myself, and I called it How I
mm,
Cured My Resting Bitch Face. And it was really
mhm,
just the steps I was going to take to rebuild my life, to heal from the
mm,
trauma of the relationship, and to also heal from the trauma of everything that led me to that relationship in the first place. So that was really the inspiration for how I cured my resting bitch face. And then I realized after the fact that it had nothing to do with my face, but also your face does reflect the relationship that you have with yourself. I truly believe when you are connected to your true self and you have that inner sense of love and respect for yourself, there's a different energy with you. And it's my journey, how I cured my resting bitch face. And I do feel like there is that energetic shift that you can tell someone's relationship with themselves through their energy. So I also have a podcast, Dear Dumb Bitch, which is kind of a play on like Dear Diary. Journaling has been such an important part of my life. So the podcast is my verbal journal of sorts. I share all of my life lessons that my inner dumb bitch is teaching me, because we all have an inner dumb bitch who is teaching us those life lessons when we pay attention and notice them. So I mean it in the most adoring and loving way, but it's just kind of my fun take on it.
I love that. And the resting bitch face is really just a reflection of what's going on internally, right? The only time I've been called or told that I have a resting bitch face was in high school, I remember. And it's interesting because when I had it, apparently, is when I was super shy and I actually was really insecure in high school. And then I guess I put on this kind of persona that looked bitchy, but it was more like a protection to myself. So.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's not like, are you a bitch or not? It's more so just the symbolism of the relationship with yourself, because that changes everything. The relationship with yourself really is the most important relationship you have with anyone.
Yeah, everything in our life is really a reflection of the love that we have for ourselves. So,
Absolutely.
and the inner dumb bitch. So, what is our inner dumb bitch? Is it a part of ourselves that we can love and accept that is kind of always there? Or is it something like,
Yeah, and you have to love and accept her, because if not, then I mean you can't hate your way to your best self. Trust me, I've
mm-hmm,
tried. And just acknowledging that we're all just doing the best that we can, and when you know better, you do better. So just noticing what's happening in your life and noticing that you are in control of it. And when you take ownership of it, that's when you can actually change your life outcome. So yeah, you have to love that inner dumb bitch, because she's gonna be there regardless.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big part of my approach, which is from a tantric background where all parts of us are equally divine, and there's those parts that, feel dumb, or the parts of us that even stayed in the relationship too long or accepted less than we deserved. And still learning. A big part of my journey has been learning to love so deeply those parts of myself that,
Mm,
accepted less than she deserved and that put herself in that position. Because I think a big part of the healing journey is really learning to accept all parts of ourselves rather than being upset that we let it get that far or even ended up in that position, because it can be easy to be like, why am I so dumb, and why did I end up there, right?
yeah, for sure. And the hardest person to forgive was not my ex. It was myself. So
Mm,
that's really one of the, I think, most important things to remember about self-love and the relationship with yourself. It's easy to love yourself when you're doing all the things and you're feeling really good, but what about
mm,
when you make mistakes and when things don't work out? How do you treat yourself then? What's your relationship with
mm,
yourself then? And it really is, like you said, loving and embracing and accepting every aspect of who you are. And that's the unconditional component of self-love, because conditional love isn't really that genuine love that feels good no matter what.
mm. Yes. And say for so you're working with women who are in toxic relationships or just getting out of them. Do you see many patterns as to why women or anyone would stay in a toxic relationship? Do you feel that it's mostly from like daddy, mummy issues from childhood, or is it coming from like a lack of self-love?
Yeah, so there's so many variables, and a lot of it does come down to that early childhood conditioning that you're
Mm-hmm.
not even aware of, and you're not even aware of how it affects the other
Mm-hmm.
relationships. But I would say the main component is always the relationship that these women, myself included, had, or rather lack thereof, with themselves. Because when you don't trust yourself, when you don't honor yourself, when you don't respect yourself, you tolerate less than you deserve in life. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
matter of recognizing what you deserve and understanding how to create that for yourself in your own life.
Yeah, I feel like when I was younger, I was never taught what I deserve or self-worth or self-love or anything around that. It was definitely something I had to figure out for myself. And I feel like sometimes, that's part of our journey to have to learn that and to basically call in what we don't want so we can figure out what we do want.
Yes, you need those experiences to kind of show
Mm,
you the alternative. And the toxic relationship is really just, it's the catalyst, it's the crack to open up and
mm,
expand and create the life that you actually want, the life that feels good. I had no idea that you could truly fall in love with yourself as deeply as I
mm-hmm,
have. And that's why I do the work that I do, is because I want to show other women what's possible. I was always looking outside of me for the love that existed in me from the
mm,
start. I just didn't know it was there. And life is so delicious when you
mm-hmm,
have that love for yourself. It's such a different experience.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I agree. And it's such a cliche to say, but we do have everything that we're seeking, that we're desiring within. And it all starts with giving ourselves that first, the love, the affection, the attention, and validation, everything that we're seeking, we can give to ourselves first.
Well, absolutely. Yeah.
So, say if someone is listening and they're really at the stage where they want to step out of that relationship. Do you feel like they have to do a big leap like you and I did, or what steps would you recommend to them?
Well, I would say if they are considering leaving, there's a good chance they're maybe waiting to feel ready to leave. And I'm just going to say it. You're never, ever going to feel ready to leave, because ready
Mm-hmm.
isn't a feeling, ready is a
Mm-hmm.
decision. So you really just need to decide to choose yourself and just know and trust that what you experienced was part of your journey for a reason, but it's really just the beginning of so much more. What feels like the end is always the beginning. So you just need to take that leap and choose yourself. Like, if you're looking for a sign, this is it. Like, choose
Mm-hmm.
yourself, and just, you have to do it. And the next thing I would recommend is, you don't need to move across the country. You don't need to switch continents. If you can, then by all means, do it. It's going to be an
Mm-hmm.
amazing experience. You're going to learn so much, but that's not always possible. But what is always possible, well, maybe not always with circumstances, perhaps if there's children involved or things like that. But if you can go no contact, then you have to go no contact. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
suck. But like you mentioned earlier, you become addicted to the toxic patterns, and your body
Mm-hmm.
and nervous system is literally addicted to the abuse. And you're going to go through withdrawals, and it sucks. Like, it's not a fun time. But if you anticipate it, just knowing it's going to suck can kind of help you be
Mm-hmm.
more prepared for it. But it's really like a drug almost. And if you
Mm-hmm.
continue to dabble here and there, you're going to keep it in your system. So if you can go no contact and just avoid all communication, block on social media, remove mementos from your house, gifts, whatever it is that's keeping that person in your life, you have to do it. You have to get rid of it, because otherwise it's just going to keep them in your life, keep them in your consciousness, and you create your future from your current reality. So you're just going to keep bringing
Mm-hmm.
that toxicity and those toxic patterns into the future you're creating for yourself. And that's how you stay trapped and stuck in your past. And that's not why you're leaving the relationship. You're not leaving the relationship to continue to be controlled by your ex. Like, you would have just stayed in the relationship. So no contact is incredibly powerful to give you the space that you need to begin your healing journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I so agree with that. Obviously, mine was quite extreme as I just flew to China and got off everything. I didn't even have a
Mm.
phone for a while. But I do agree that we need to cut off contact. And what really helped me as well is through the really challenging days that it is like a drug. It's like you're withdrawing and, you just want to contact them so badly and go back to that drug. But for me, it was remembering that eventually the day is going to come where I wake up and it's not going to be so hard and I'm not going to
Hmm.
want to contact them. And through my breakups in my life, I've realized that day does come where you look back and you're like, I don't even want to talk to them. So it's like getting through that point until you can finally be there and like, no, that's not good for me. And it's actually, you're turned off by the thought of even being in contact. And that day does come. You just have to get
That's
rid of
it.
through the initial like attachment. And yeah.
Yeah, and it's so interesting with these toxic relationships. Most of the time we remember things worse than they actually were. But in a toxic relationship,
Mm,
you remember all of the good things and it wasn't bad 100% of the time. And
mm-hmm,
you remember all of the times that it was good and you forget all of the times where you felt alone and
mm-hmm,
you were hurt and criticized and at all of the toxic patterns. So it can be helpful to make a list of all of the ways that you were hurt in the relationship, and when you feel tempted to contact your ex-partner, then read that list instead and have a plan in place, because you're going to want to reach out. But if you can be proactive and have a plan in place and decide ahead of time what you're going to do when those cravings come in, then you're going to be more successful at maintaining the no contact.
mm. I love that. And there's a lot of self awareness rather than just numbing out our feelings and being prepared for what's coming too, not being in
Hmm.
denial that it's going to be really fucking hard.
Yeah, yeah, and you have to feel in order to heal. I
Mm-hmm.
thought I could think my way out. I'm really good at overthinking, but I realized on my own personal journey that I did use a lot of, numbing techniques and distractions
Mm-hmm.
to avoid all of the pain that I was feeling. And I took a lot of detours in my own personal
Mm-hmm.
healing journey, which again, now I'm grateful for, because I have that information to share with the women that I work with. So that way they can learn from my own personal lessons.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I did some numbing of my own as well, and I came to the point where I realized that when we're numbing the pain, we're also numbing the ability to feel heightened states of ecstasy and bliss and joy as well. We just are completely numb from it all. So,
Yeah, apparently you can't be selective with your feelings. You
mhm.
can, and you could only feel as high as you're willing to feel low.
Yeah, exactly. Uh,
And really, emotions, they're not good or bad. They just what they
mhm,
are. And it's the story that we attach to it that gives it meaning and really keeps it in our narrative. But the emotions themselves, they're meant to be let go of. They're energy and
mhm,
motion. They're supposed to feel them and release them. And what you don't release, you're keeping. So if you are
mhm,
carrying the shit from the past, then there's a good chance your future is going to feel like crap. So you have to
mhm.
feel it and let it go. But there's ways to, facilitate that process and to have support so it doesn't have to feel as, scary or overwhelming as it could be.
Definitely. For me, yeah, even just going into the forest and screaming and beating up my pillow and
Yes,
there's
yeah.
healthy outlets to let go of the rage we have. And for me, I was really shaming the anger and rage that I felt because I was kind of in this victim, like sad little puppy dog, like I said, that I felt so powerless that I didn't know how to get angry back. And I was really scared to react at his anger. So the
Mm.
process was literally hitting my pillow and screaming into it until finally that rage came up and I was able to release it because I had pushed it down, certain feelings down so deeply that I didn't even know if I could express them. But
That must have been such a beautiful release for you to let that out.
yeah, it was powerful. And I think a really big part of it is releasing shame around so much, around our humanness, around our emotions, around our feelings, and around the past versions of ourselves as well that, got us there.
Absolutely. And I feel like there is such a stigma almost about these toxic relationships. And, people don't like to talk about them. And of course, it's not a
Mm-hmm.
fun thing to talk about, but when you aren't sharing, then you're keeping it inside of you. And that's really where shame develops, is with that, not secrecy, but just really just internalizing it. So there's a lot of power in actually being able to express that with people that you trust and care about. So that way you don't just
Mm-hmm.
build the shame within yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I give the analogy of pushing like a beach ball into the water, and the more that we're trying to push it in and not expressing it, the higher it will explode. So sharing our
That's a
story is
that's
so
a really great
powerful.
way to look at it. Yes, yeah.
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 One thing that I really like that you shared as well is that you created this program initially for yourself. And I found that a big part of my healing journey was also the journaling part and self-coaching, because at the time I couldn't afford, because a lot of women, especially leaving relationships, we end up in this position where we have to get rid of our cars and we're all of a sudden homeless, staying on our sister's couch. That was for a bit as well. And I found like I would put in my phone notes like what I would say to someone as a coach to myself, like, this is why you don't want to call him back. These are the things he did, just reminding you, and you're powerful, you're badass, like all these things. And I would just read it whenever I wanted to message him. I'm like, okay, I got this. Just wait, give it another day.
I love that. I would use post-it notes, and I literally had post-it notes everywhere. It was like my favorite home decor, with just affirmations and reminders, because I really needed to update my entire belief system to reflect the future I wanted and to actually believe in myself, because I didn't at the time.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, giving back to ourselves what we need.
Mhm.
So, well, thank you so much for sharing your journey and for having the bravery as well to open up about these parts of your life and your story, because as you mentioned, it's so powerful. When I was like 20, I remember I started having suicidal thoughts. It got so bad. And I was looking, this was before I was really online with social media or anything. And it wasn't just like so easily accessed to have this information. And I remember at the time thinking, if I could just find one woman who has been through what I've been through and who made it out and who even thrived from that, like it would help so much. And at the time I didn't have that. So that's why this is so dear to me. And that's why I actually got online too and started sharing these very vulnerable parts of my journey, because I knew what it was like to feel like I was the only one who had ever gone through this. So I just really want to honor you and thank you for opening up about, these parts of your
Mm.
life.
And thank you for sharing your story as well. I resonate so
Mm,
deeply with it. And it really is such an amazing gift to show women at some of their darkest times, what's
mm,
possible. There is a light at the end of a tunnel, and it's not a train. Like, your future is so much brighter
mm.
than you even know. So just, being able to extend that hand and provide some hope and help them navigate the journey is such an amazing opportunity.
Yes. And for anyone listening who wants to dive more into your world, where can we find you?
Yes, I am on Instagram. I'll give you my handle to link in the show notes. I am on TikTok. I have my podcast, Dear Dumb Bitch, and I have lots of resources on my website as well. And most of them are free, just because I know that, having access to resources can be challenging after leaving
Mm-hmm.
a relationship. So I just really want to provide as much information as possible and make it accessible to all women. And then I, of course, have my private mentorship as well.
Beautiful. So inspiring. Thank you so much, Kel, for being here. I know that it will
Thank
help.
you.
Yeah, I know it will help some women or just beautiful souls who are feeling maybe even stuck, who hear this and see it as their sign.
Oh, thank you, Krystal. I appreciate you inviting me on your show.